This Democratic Majority Council has worked very hard behind the scenes, both in caucus meetings and budget meetings, to try to come up with a number that was a little more sensible than the 16.5% percentage that was being proposed by the mayor. We did this through some new generators in revenue. We did this through some cuts, and we were able to get the council's amended budget down to 13.5%. Still nowhere near where I think many of my colleagues would want to be in light of the 7% tax increase last year, but better than 16.5%. As noted, the mayor has vetoed the budget adopted by this council, and so tonight the council has the opportunity to override the mayoral veto, and will need to do so by a 6-vote majority. It takes 6 votes this evening to override the mayor's veto. I would implore my colleagues to do so for the following reasons. One is that 16.5% is just simply undoable to many people in the city of Poughkeepsie. I represent, as I think the majority of our council members do, people that are struggling to keep their homes afloat in light of, as it has been noted by many of the people that have spoke here, in light of the water bill going crazy, in light of a sanitation tax, in light of a sewer rate increase, and in light of that 7% tax increase last year. And all of this in light of, really not new services being given to the city of Poughkeepsie. This last snowstorm, we still have, as people have noted, properties that have lots of snow in front of their sidewalks. I know the administration, as the mayor has indicated earlier this evening, is working to address that, but these are revenue-producing items that could be helping us if we had the right enforcement. And that's why I think that those revenue-producing generators that we put into our budget can be hit if we enforce it, if we're not lazy in the city. We've been lazy for a long time in the city of Poughkeepsie when it comes to enforcement. And whether it's a lack of manpower or a lack of willpower, we've been lazy. As I said last council meeting, give me a ticket book and I can generate hundreds of dollars in the first ward alone for things that are not being enforced. We just had in this room last week a tax sale where I believe 284 tax liens were sold for probably a variety of reasons, but I'm going to guess that a good portion is just people simply can't afford it. When you add 7% from last year and you add 16.5% to this year, if this override doesn't pass, you're looking at nearly 25% tax increase on the residents of the city. And I have to tell you, it's gotten personal for me because unfortunately, some very close relatives of mine, their tax lien was sold at last week's tax lien sale. And not because they don't care about the city of Poughkeepsie, not because they don't love the city of Poughkeepsie, because they both have lived here their entire lives, and they've both lived on that street for over 30 years, but they can't afford it. They're on Social Security. They don't have a pension. They're struggling to make ends meet, and I'm struggling to help them make ends meet. And I simply, in good faith, cannot vote for a 16.5% tax increase on the residents of the city. And I recognize that 16.5 gives the city some added money to do things, to have a little coffer. But we gave the coffer last year at 7% when the mayor came in at 5.5, and I can't give the coffer this year. I can't give it for people like my relatives that have lived here for so long. As May Parker Howard said, people that have lived here for 30, 40 years and, toughed it out when everybody else fled and went to the town or went to Spackengill. These people have stayed here. We don't live in $400,000 homes in the first ward. We don't live in $250,000 homes in the first ward. We live in $100,000 homes and $120,000 homes, and we don't have 2 Cadillacs in the driveway or Jeep Cherokee, and we don't have a pension. We're struggling in the first ward like in a lot of other wards, and I simply cannot support a 16.5% tax increase. I believe in the mayor. I believe in his vision. I was a firm supporter of his, continue to be. When he became mayor, I believe the sales of the city went up and wind was blowing behind them, but I believe that this 16.5% tax increase will drop the wind from our sails, that investors will not invest here. Who wants to invest into a city that sees a 16.5% tax increase and not knowing what may happen next year on top of the 7% of last year. So I would implore my colleagues that 13.5 is a lot better than 16.5, and that I believe that if we're not lazy, as I indicated, if we enforce the things that we've put into our budget, that we can hit these revenue projections, and that the city of Poughkeepsie will go forward. So I'm just here to say that my vote is to override the mayor's veto, and I implore my colleagues to do the same. Mr. Young.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some serious questions about this, and I'm going to go on record with my concerns, since we really weren't able to have a full-out discussion on this topic. I think I concur with Councilmember Cherry raised the comments that we tried to put forward some building code, building fine and fee structure changes, and they have not materialized. And the latest draft that I saw had quite a few questions in it. And on top of that, we had our public hearing today about increasing the bus fares. This very same people who commented to us earlier about increasing the bus fares came today to say that the 50 cents was too high and they would want 25 cents instead. I understand that the credit markets and various lenders, including this, and as well as the state, are looking at this city, and they are highlighting the fact that we have placed in our budget revenues, speculative revenues that have not materialized. Something that has happened in the city for years and has led to the city's financial problems. I know that I spoke against speculative revenues prior to being on this council, and in my statement regarding the budget, I was optimistic that we would be able to get there. I do still believe that the parking fine changes are a valid and logically calculated set of increases in revenue that have actual numbers to back them up. I do believe that those are a legitimate way to reduce the people of this city's tax burden by not penalizing people who actually follow the law and only penalizing those who insist on breaking it. I also believe that the parking fines represent changes to increases to bring us in line with other cities, and also fine people who are actively violating the law in really egregious ways, like parking in front of fire hydrants and blocking driveways. I think I would have really preferred if we had been able to override just those portions of the mayor's veto that we felt strongly and unanimously about. I do think the increase in parking fines, since we've already passed that, and we believe that it is fiscally sound, that overriding simply that veto would have been preferable. On the other hand, there are other issues in here that the mayor has vetoed that I feel like I have to agree with, given his letter, given the credit markets, and given the public comment we've heard recently since since information has come out and since the various public hearings we've had. So I just feel I want to go on record with those statements. I think the council's budget, which came in for the average homeowner of just under $1 a day, was probably a better way to a better collaboration between the council members. But I do fear that if we push that forward in its entirety without having the credit markets behind us, without having the state behind us, that we are just setting up the city for further ruin. And while I would have preferred the increase in parking fines to help reduce taxes slightly, if we have to have the taxes for the average homeowner increased by just over $1 a day, then that is what we might have to do. So that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To be quite honest, I don't support the mayor's budget, and I don't support the council's budget. I would have preferred to see the people's budget a budget that fits the city of Poughkeepsie. I don't think raising the taxes 16%, 16.5%, 17, or whatever it is the right thing to do. There is a great need for finances in the city of Poughkeepsie, but there's always the homeowners that have to bear the brunt of careless spending year after year after year. We have to do a lot better than we're doing to put our finances in order so that we don't have to go to the taxpayers every time to ask for the taxes to be raised to balance our budgets and that sort of thing. It's getting to the point where it's almost wrong to own a home. That shouldn't be. It was always a sense of pride to own a home. But now it's difficult to pay the taxes year after year. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'm very unsure of what direction we're going here. Also, the question of the buses. I've been on the bus service committee about 2 years, such as it was, and it seemed to me that the information that we were getting may or may not have been accurate. We never had a seat at the table, at least to the best of my knowledge, and based on what our chairman says, he also didn't have a seat at the table to talk about merging the bus services together. It seemed to me that things like this should be shared with the council, since we're supposed to be representing the constituents that ride the bus. But if we don't get a seat at the table, no one hears anything that we have to suggest, and they don't hear our opinion. It's wrong. We are supposed to be serving the people, government of the people. But most of the times the people are not listened to. They came here week after week. I have all of this written down, everything that they said. I have it written in this book right here, on another book. I record everything that they say about keeping the buses because they rely on the bus to go to the doctors, to go to their jobs, to visit their family members, everything that they do because that's their only means of transport. It's okay to feel that it's okay to merge the buses if you have a car and you can leave to go wherever you're going at will. That is not the same thing that the bus riders have. I heard this gentleman saying he had to leave his home an hour and a half before it was time for him to go, and then he couldn't cross the road because he was blind. That's a very sad story. And so I appeal to those who think the city doesn't need a bus service to change their mind. Let's all sit down and talk about it before you make that decision. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. McNamara.
Yes, I will not be supporting the veto override for 3 very simple reasons. One is it came to our attention that the PBA contract and the buyout for the police department was ours. We were increasing and theirs we were decreasing. I'm not comfortable with that, and I just don't think it's the right thing to do. Secondly, I'm not okay with the politicizing of the management raises within the city of Poughkeepsie. I think it's something that we should probably stay away from. If a CSEA member gets a raise, management follows. That's the way it's pretty much done with all unions and union shops. And thirdly, for clarification, from the mayor's budget to the council's budget, there is nothing that changed. Like, I don't want people to think somehow that the numbers were changed in the county and the council's budget that's going to save the buses. Nothing was touched there, and that needs to be emphasized. Moving forward as a city, it's a hard pill to swallow, but it's puts us in a better financial footing moving forward. And I've talked to people say talk to your constituents. I have been, and in my ward, they want us to move forward in a financially stable way. And because of that, I will not be supporting the override.
Thank you. Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as we sit here today, This is a city whose finances are at a point where we have a below investment bond rating. We also more urgently have what's called a negative outlook. A year ago, when this discussion was taking place regarding the 16 budget, I asked, when is the city going to get control of its finances? My concern was heightened when Mr. Nightgo from Capital Markets came and spoke on April 11th of this year and told us and reminded us of our negative outlook and of our bond rating, and advised us that the negative outlook is something that has an urgency to it. The bond rating takes time to bring up, and it is anticipated by those who watch municipalities like Poughkeepsie, and we are being watched on a day-to-day basis, that we have to work on the bond rating, but we really have, it's an absolute emergency to work on the negative outlook. And Mr. Nightgo's advice to this body, to this room, to those in government, those in staff, and those in the audience among the people, was to stop the bleeding. I must oppose the override, Mr. Chairman. I must support the mayor's budget. This is the conclusion of my 5th year on this council. I welcome the council's renewed or revitalized attention to revenue. I can tell you that in 5 years in this council, the emphasis on revenue has been tepid at best. This is just like your home. You cannot pay the bills unless you have income. And time again, revenue-generating measures have been met with ambivalence in this chamber by members of the council and by the folks who come and speak at public comment. The state comptroller, with much fanfare, conducted a very publicized audit of the city of Poughkeepsie in 2013. He advised this city that it must find ongoing daily sources of revenue and to try to not rely upon and must not rely upon one-shots like sale of city-owned properties. I was not on the council in 2013, but parking meters were baked into the cake for the budget for 2014. They were on the agenda to actually pass, and it was shot down, and was only after the bargaining units were told there now have to be payroll cuts. And then miraculously it made it back on the agenda, but Saturday parking fees were eliminated, and the price structure was changed. And the reaction to parking meters was vehement. Everyone was opposed to it. The Poughkeepsie Journal lectured and opined, scolding the city, parking meters are not the answer. There is no the answer. It was one of many revenue-generating measures that could have been brought to the foreground and acted upon and implemented. As a result of that vote down, parking meters did not start generating revenue until mid-year 2014, and then folks said, see, they didn't generate the revenue they were supposed to. Well, of course not. Other revenue-generating measures have difficulty. A year ago, the Wheaton Park Pelton Manor development barely passed, 6-2. Developers meet with sometimes uncharitable reception in this chamber. The gentleman who renovated the row houses across from the Family Partnership Center was treated as if he was a criminal when he first came here. And he was spoken to very, very harshly after he had renovated those homes and was working on the King's Court Hotel. A very highly regarded developer throughout Dutchess County came to this council and proposed a development and was spoken to by a member of this council, not present, this was a past council, in very harsh terms and tones. I'm glad this council has decided that revenue is an important feature. It wasn't for a long time. We speak of the prior administration. This didn't happen, and it's a serious situation. Did not happen on January 1st, 2008. It didn't start on January 1st, 2016. This is the culmination of years of a lack of attention to revenue. This city is revenue-starved. This city has a contracted tax base, more than its fair share of tax-exempt buildings, more than its fair share of poor people. and attention must be constantly paid to the revenue side of the equation, and it wasn't. And here we are. We have advisors now, capital markets. We have the state agency, the Financial Review Board. We have to take their advice. They are our medical team for all intents and purposes. And when they review and advise, and they are watching, and they are experts, we disregard their advice at our own peril. I've seen a city in grave, grave distress. Detroit, where my wife is from, Michelle. We were there 30 years ago, and I've seen what that's like. Other municipalities in our region have been in grave distress, and they've worked their way out of it. And they work their way out of it by working very hard and making hard decisions. In this council chamber, we are confronted in every meeting during public comment with members of the public who understand that the city is facing grave financial circumstances, but the phraseology is always, I know the city's broke, but the city must find money for this and that. And those entreaties must be carefully treated, Mr. Chairman. And we can't agree to do everything to make everybody happy. Our impulse is to try to take care of the folks. We just can't do it in every instance. I would also say that I wouldn't blame just my council members. Members of the public, our own city employees have provided little support for revenue generating measures themselves when they draw their salaries and benefits from the revenues that the city that takes in. Every city employee can come here and say something in support of revenue generating measures without lobbying for a particular development or developer. For instance, people in DPW, fire department, police, and other city employees can articulate publicly that they recognize that empty spaces become dark and dangerous and at the very least messy places. And they need attention, and they need people to come in and develop them and make something happen that's meaningful for the public. At our very last council meeting, a former member of this council came and complained about the Benora project, that it was too tall. We decry the lack of the sales tax that was taken away, and yet we do not do enough to generate our own sales tax. We're glad to have Mr. Bamonte here, but the Ice House has gone without a liquor license for years now. I realize there are issues. They need to be worked out. We can generate our own sales tax by making sure we bring people into the city. The memorandum of understanding with the MTA regarding empty spaces the MTA owns failed or got pulled the first time. That was a critical piece of action by the city. And thank God it's in place, thankfully for this city. We have to do what is advised to us by our medical team. I have read the memo from Mr. Nightco that was provided to this council earlier this month. I have also read the veto message from the mayor, and I agree. This city's been slapped, literally slapped, by having unrealistic revenue projections. Some of those projections were realistic at the time they were made, and then some of those sources of revenue were stalled by actions or inactions of this very council. In short, ladies and gentlemen, and Mr. Chairman, we have met the enemy, and it is us and our predecessors and members of the city community, people who work here, live here, and do business here. They need to do more to support what the city is trying to do when it comes to controlling its finances and generating revenue to pay the bills. This particular budget has been reviewed by capital markets, whose advice I take to heart. They have credited Mr. Mayor's budget with making realistic projections and assumptions about revenue. That was critical, that had to be corrected. It would also, it credits the budget, the mayor's budget, with having reasoned and disciplined spending, but also anticipating, and this is one of the reasons for the budget involving the tax increase, is that expenses will climb in 2017, the expenses of running this city. Also, there is the possibility of grants from the federal and state government and assistance from the county. These are not baked into the cake of the budget, so that if they don't come through, then the budget fails. We are told by the FRB and by capital markets that this budget is an important tool. I credit the mayor with developing an instrument that is not just the budget for 2017 with fixes here and there and Band-Aids. It is an organized and structurally sound budget. It provides a planning tool for next year, and in that regard, a multi-year plan to fix the finances of this city. It is not desirable to keep on spending and acting as if there is no such thing as receivership or even bankruptcy. We cannot continue to do what we've been doing, and we cannot continue to blame prior administrations. This is our doing right now going forward. This budget provides the ability to do that. Mr. Chairman, I am opposed to the override. I support the mayor's budget. I will vote accordingly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Johnson.
Yes. I think that there were many additional amendments that could have been made to cut the tax increase. I would have been more comfortable with single digits. I could never support the mayor's budget. People can't afford a 16% tax increase, especially when they're not going to receive better or more efficient city services. A significant portion of the increase is attributed to salaries, unions, and health care. Consequently, will result in tax increases for the next few years, which I did not support. It's a travesty to eliminate the lifeline of the city for our seniors, disabled, veterans, and our youth. I'm not a supporter of either budget individually, but since I have to choose between the two, I will choose the amendments and support the override. That concludes my comments.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson.
Yes, I just want to say Mike Young and Mrs. Cherry had worked diligent time to get this budget together, and I thought we was all on one page, but I will not support the mayor's budget. Thank you so much, and thank you, Mike, and thank you, Tasha, for all the work that you have done.
Thank you. Ms. Cherry.
Yes. First off, let me thank the mayor and administration for the hard work that you've done. Thank you for acknowledging us earlier in the meeting. No matter what happens tonight with this vote, I remain committed to helping to move the city forward. I will be supporting the override, even though it appears that it will not pass. And I would just like to state my reasons for the record. And again, I will not hold any kind of malice or animosity, and I will continue to find those revenue-generating items that Councilman Klein spoke of. The first reason that I will support the override, and the primary reason is listening to the constituents in my ward. It was Ms. Parker Harris who said, you know, you have to stand up for what you believe in and serve those that voted you in. In the 6th Ward, we had a presentation a couple of months ago that stated we have 95 vacant and abandoned properties. There was a tax lien sale last week, as Mr. Pestis stated. There were 3 pages of tax liens, many of which were residents of the 6th Ward as well. So with that said, the primary reason for me working diligently, and I just want to point out to the members of the public that the Democratic majority worked on this budget for a long time, for weeks. Councilman Young and myself put in a lot of hours. I want to say, as far as the police contract is concerned, we did not see a dollar figure, but yet a percentage of what their health insurance would be. So when this budget was composed, when the council's budget was composed, we had no way of knowing. And again, I will reiterate, we did not put in an increase for health insurance, but cut the council's health insurance by $4,000. Also, as far as management salaries, which perplexes me that council members would say they don't want to get involved in that when it was a unanimous decision that we were not supporting increases, especially without employees being evaluated or any evidence of the work that they have done to deserve such a large increase. Lastly, I can admit that our council budget was not perfect. It was an attempt to lower the overall levy to help some of our most vulnerable citizens, some of our taxpayers. I spoke before about the widows, you know, and people are going to have their own opinion, and they're going to listen to whoever they want to listen to, and they're going to vote however they want to vote. But I know throughout all of this, I will sleep good at night knowing that I've done everything I could do, that I knew how to do, to try to make a change, whether it's unsuccessful or not. And for that, I'm not mad. I'm actually, I'm content with however this vote goes. That's all I have to say.
Any other follow-ups? I will just say that we are all elected by a certain demographic in a certain area of the city, and we all have to report to our residents on how we vote this evening. This is a critical vote. 16.5% is nothing to laugh about. But again, I'm going to say this, that we are not going to fix the finances of this city on the backs of city taxpayers. It's going to require some new ideas, which this council, I think, has pushed. It's going to require some new generators. And, if a 16% tax increase is what it takes to solve our finances, we didn't really have to go through capital markets and hire Commissioner of Finance, who's doing a great job at his salary. I mean, this council could have said, well, let's do 25%, and we could have been done with it and solved everything in Poughkeepsie. But what this is, in my opinion, in representing, again, the First Ward, this is gentrification through taxation. That is what this is. This is gentrification through taxation. This will push out the people that can barely afford to live here, that want to live here, and will no doubt change the fabrics of our neighborhoods. We'll have the roll on this resolution.
Councilor Young?
No.
Councilor Perry?
Nay.
Councilor McNamara?
Nay.
Councilor Klein?
Nay.
Councilor Johnson?
Aye.
Councilor Cherry?
Aye.
Councilor Lorraine Johnson?
Aye.
Councilor Petzis?
Aye.
Defeated 4-4.
Correct. And so we should all know that your percentage of tax increase will be 16.5% next year.